What if I told you that the skies once roared with the wings of birds so abundant they could eclipse the sun, and now they are nothing but ghosts in history? From the passenger pigeon, whose flock stretched for miles, to the elusive Mauritius kestrel, which danced on the brink of extinction. These birds once ruled the world only to vanish forever. How did they disappear? Could we have stopped it? And which species might be next? This is the chilling tale of the extinct birds you didn't know about. The passenger pigeon. Once there were billions of them. In the forests of North America, they were everywhere. They lived in enormous colonies, flocks so dense they darkened the sky and created a spectacle unlike any other in the animal kingdom. But despite their numbers, something dark was beginning to stir on the horizon, a change that would soon be felt throughout the continent. As the 19th century progressed, human expansion began to take its toll. This immense abundance, once so magnificent, would soon become a story of destruction and the very hands that had once admired them. The passenger pigeon was a bird of opportunity for hunters. Its large flocks made it an easy target. No need to chase them, no need to wait for the right moment. They flew in such massive groups that they could be shot down by the thousands all at once. The greed didn't stop there. The pigeons weren't just killed for sport, they were slaughtered to feed a growing nation. By the mid-1800s, with the rise of industrialization and the expansion of railroads, the hunting reached unprecedented levels. The pigeon's meat became a cheap commodity, the nests were destroyed, and the sound of the rifle became the soundtrack of their downfall. The flocks grew smaller. The colonies that once numbered in the millions slowly dwindled as their populations were decimated. In just a few decades, the once abundant passenger pigeon was on the brink of extinction, but there was one last stand, a final desperate attempt to save the species. In 1914, Martha, the last known passenger pigeon, sat alone in the Cincinnati Zoo. For years, she had been the last of her kind, the final echo of a species that had once ruled the skies. She lived her final days in isolation as a symbol of human destruction. The last passenger pigeon died on September 1st, 1914. One bird alone, one bird that would mark the end of a species that had been around for thousands of years. No more would the skies be filled with their haunting calls, no more would their wings blast out the sun. The passenger pigeon became extinct, and with it an entire ecosystem was forever changed. But the story of the passenger pigeon is more than just a story of loss. It's a reminder of how fragile life can be and how easily we can destroy what we love most. The disappearance of the passenger pigeon wasn't just the death of a bird, it was the collapse of a world that was once vibrant and teeming with life. In the northernmost reaches of the North Atlantic, where icy winds whip through rocky cliffs and the seas are a constant, untamable force, there once lived a bird like no other, a bird that was both majestic and uniquely adapted to life in the harshest of environments. It was known as the Great Auk. The Great Auk, Pinguinus impennis, was a flightless bird that stood nearly 3 feet tall, about the size of a large penguin. With its glossy black feathers, white belly, and bright orange beak, it was a bird both striking in appearance and remarkable in its abilities. A bird that spent almost its entire life at sea, only returning to land to breed. This bird was found along the coasts of the North Atlantic, from the Arctic to the coasts of Iceland, Greenland, and Northern Europe. But its home wasn't just any land, it was the edge of the world, the frigid cliffs where few creatures could survive. A true master of its domain, the Great Auk had evolved to be perfectly suited to this environment. While the Great Auk couldn't fly, it was an extraordinary swimmer, able to dive to incredible depths, hunting for fish and other sea life. Its powerful wings, short for flight but perfectly suited for swimming, propelled it through the water like an underwater torpedo. In fact, the Great Auk was so well adapted to life in the ocean that it spent the majority of its life in the water, only returning to land for a few weeks each year to mate and raise its young. The Great Auk's breeding habits were simple yet tragic. It laid only one egg per year on the steep cliffs of isolated islands. For generations, the birds would return to these same cliffs unchallenged, where they would incubate their eggs and raise their chicks. But in the 15th century, the arrival of European explorers would forever alter the fate of the Great Auk. At first, these sailors were awestruck by the birds, seeing them as curiosities, strange flightless creatures far from the known world. And so the story of the Great Auk's downfall began, not with the fangs of predators, but with the greed of human hands. At first, the Great Auk was hunted for its meat, which, while not particularly flavorful, was a welcome source of food for sailors on long voyages. But as the demand for resources grew, the slaughter became more systematic, more efficient. Soon the birds were hunted for their feathers, prized for their quality, and used to make pillows and bedding. Their eggs were collected as souvenirs, and their fat used for oil lamps.
But it wasn't just that the Great Auk was hunted, it was the sheer scale of the hunting. Whole colonies of these birds were wiped out by relentless human exploitation. They had no ability to flee, no means of defense. Their flightlessness made them easy targets. In fact, entire colonies, once thriving, were wiped off the map in a matter of years. The hunters weren't satisfied with simply killing for food. They took everything, stripping these colonies of their life force. And all the while, the Great Auk, with no means to escape, faced its inevitable end. By the 18th century, the Great Auk's numbers were dwindling. The birds had been driven away from their once secure breeding grounds by relentless human activity. With fewer and fewer safe nesting places left, the Great Auk was pushed to the brink. The last known colony of Great Auks was on the small island of Eldey off the coast of Iceland. It was here in 1844 that the final chapter of the Great Auk's tragic tale was written. On a summer day in 1844, two egg collectors arrived at Eldey Island. They knew the last few remaining Great Auks were there, nesting in the rocks, but what they didn't know was that in their hands they held the future of an entire species. The men made their way to the cliffs, but what happened next was nothing short of devastating, and an act that would forever haunt history. The final 2 Great Auks were killed, no more were left alive, and with that the Great Auk was gone forever. The extinction of the Great Auk was not a slow, natural decline. It was a swift, brutal collapse brought on by human greed and ignorance. A bird that had survived for thousands of years in the harshest of environments was wiped out in a mere blink of an eye. But the Great Auk is more than just a cautionary tale. It is a reminder of how fragile our planet's creatures are, and how easily we can destroy that which we fail to understand or value. The Great Auk's silent scream still echoes through time, urging us to protect the life that remains. The Great Auk may be gone, but its story is one we must never forget. Yes, so in this video, I have only told about 2 birds which are already extinct, because the video had already become very long. If you are interested in knowing about more birds, then write part 2 in the comments, then I will make a detailed video in which I will cover all the extinct birds, and you also suggest me some video ideas about which you are interested to know, and subscribe to the channel for notification of the next video. So let's meet in the next video.